One of the main reasons I love RWBY isn't because of how it looks. That's probably the reason I didn't have a single problem with the shift from Poser to Maya, unlike a lot of the fans. And while the fights themselves were amazing to watch, I rewatched the Nevermore scene in the Emerald Forest episode Players in Pieces dozens of times. Again, they weren't why I fell in love with RWBY. They were certainly part of what I loved, but not the whole. No, there are really two main things I loved about RWBY. One is to do with the story. That doesn't mean the plot, however. To be completely honest, I generally found much of the plot from the first two seasons, and yes, now volumes 4 and 5, to be somewhat lacking. There wasn't this sense of victory when things went well, or defeat when they didn't, because the actions didn't seem to have real consequences. When they beat the bosses at the end of volumes 1 and 2, there was no real feeling of victory since nothing really changed. The less said about Stretch Armstrong the better, and although I did enjoy that fight, the closure for Ren rang hollow. I know it's part of a longer, overarching plot, but that doesn't change that the wins and losses felt stilted, almost empty. I started watching RWBY right off the bat. I'd been a massive fan of Red vs. Blue, and a lot of the things I loved about that I hoped to see in RWBY. Reconstruction was by far my favourite season of RWBY because of the story behind it. The meta, the alpha, the actual emotion behind everything was amazing, and I loved every minute of it. I absolutely loved the CGI fights they did later, but it was the feelings that Reconstruction gave me that made it my favourite. And when I saw the trailers for RWBY, although I couldn't really understand this at the time, I was expecting something similar. To have not just a good plot, but those same feelings. A sense of loss or joy or hope even. The trailers gave off that perfect vibe, that we were going to experience something amazing, that would give us this whole range of emotion. And while the opening tones of Volume 1 followed that perfectly, with Salem's introduction and Ozpin's quiet rebuttal, the rest of the season just didn't seem to carry the same weight to it. Maybe I was expecting too much too soon. It's not an adult show after all. I mean, the closest we get to profanity is Tyrion's "You bitch!" And coming from a company whose name is a cockbite joke, that's not exactly saying much. But regardless, I just wasn't drawn in as much by the episodes as I was by the trailers. I thought it was because the trailers were just so cool with the fights and the choreography, but now I've realised that it's again because of how they made me feel. In the Red trailer there's this overall feeling of loss, which is then cast aside as the fight takes place and you feel epic, for lack of a better word. The White trailer is despondent throughout, this heavy sense of oppression carrying you along, and the victory at the end is uplifting and freeing. Blake's moment shows someone going through something similar, casting off the shackles of her past, while Yang is just plain awesome. It's what a good fight should be, with a real sense of victory at the end of it. And apart from a few key moments, the aforementioned Nevermore scene being one, we never really came close to that in volumes 1 or 2. I still liked it, don't get me wrong. It was easily one of my favourite things to watch, and much like with Red vs. Blue, I was eagerly waiting for each new episode. But like I said, the story just didn't seem to carry the same weight. The good guys win, the bad guys stay in the shadows, everyone is happy. And then Volume 3 happened, and I became borderline obsessed, depending on who you ask. It started out on a good note. 2's opening was weaker to me than 1 because there wasn't really the sort of tone I liked. It's a running theme, I guess. I don't like happy. 3 felt much more similar to 1, which I really appreciated, with the melancholic but sweet, heartfelt talk to Summer's grave. Then we leap back into the action and everything continues as it does before. Except it doesn't. There's problem after problem, there's no real sense that everything is fine as everyone is going through a really heavy time, and we're seeing that the good guys aren't always succeeding. The evil machinations are going through, Pyrrha and Yang are being put through the ringer, and then... This is when it finally got real. When we finally got the feeling that there are real consequences to winning and losing, in victory and defeat. And this just keeps being piled on top of us. It's heavy and it's very emotional. There's real loss, which brings a tangible sense of hopelessness and despair for the very first time in the episodes themselves, and it is wonderful. It became exactly what I wanted from the show at the beginning without me even realising it. The oppressive air to the entire last arc of Volume 3 is just amazing, and there are some truly heart-wrenching moments. And when the final act came up, I was just relishing the experience. And throughout the entirety of the end of the beginning, and particularly during Pyrrha's moment with Jean and her last moments, I had a ridiculous grin on my face. Not because I'm sadistic, although feel free to debate that. It was because I enjoyed the feeling. Not the plot, not the choreography, not the acting itself, but the sheer emotion that it brought. And that is when I truly fell in love with the show. I started looking at fan art, reading and even writing fan fiction, and consuming as much of the fandom as I could just to try and prolong that emotional high. It's why I started making the various things you can see in other videos on my channel, with the plaque, the arm and the coasters, which, by the way, seem to have been lost in transit to Rooster Teeth. That's what I get for trusting convention stuff, I suppose. Rooster Teeth haven't quite managed to recapture those feelings since, although they've certainly tried. The more recent volumes aren't quite as good as Volume 3 as far as emotion goes, but I've definitely loved them nonetheless. The closest they came was probably just as we met wacky waving inflatable armman, with Crow on the verge of death and everyone just feeling crushed. Although again, everything was just fine and everyone came out okay, which, in case you hadn't noticed, isn't my shtick. I don't blame them, it's incredibly hard to get that sort of feeling, but I do wish that they would, and I've got hopes that they will. But another, equally large reason I adore RWBY is because of the music. The RWBY soundtrack was genuinely the first music I ever bought. By bought I mean paid money for, not obtained somewhere. And that is because Jeff and Casey Lee Williams did and continue to do a masterful job of producing music that not only stands alone perfectly well, but gives RWBY this stunning ambience. Most of my favourite moments in the entire series come down almost entirely to the feeling produced by the music, the songs that underlie them. I love every single one of the trailer songs, with Mirror Mirror probably being my favourite, and Red Like Roses a close second due to my masochistic taste for suffering. They also made possibly two of my favourite songs of all time. All Our Days is a truly beautiful piece, with a soft, quiet tone and a heartfelt message. But in case you hadn't guessed, I'm into sad songs, and there's really only one that can take that mantle unopposed. The first time I heard Cold in the Volume 3 end credits, I fell in love with it. But the first time I heard the full piece, with the strings setting in slowly and the part crescendo with the final chorus, I had goosebumps. I still do, every time I hear it. Cold is beautiful and breathtaking, at once hopeful and heartbreaking, and a better send-off for Monty I could not imagine. It is my favourite song, bar none. Within the series itself, there are some jaw-dropping moments propped by fantastic songs. Velvet's fight with the Paladins backed by I May Fall was incredible, and I repeated it a dozen times the same day I first saw it. The background to End of the Beginning was also a wonderful theme, carrying the episode even higher, but those weren't my favourite musical moments. I have a slight confession. Earlier I said that Volumes 1 and 2 didn't give the emotional range or complexity that I loved, and while generally that's true, there is one moment that just felt beautiful entirely as a result of the music. Right at the end of Volume 1, just as things are wrapping up, Wings starts playing, and as the credits start rolling, the vocals begin. I said that the endings of most of the volumes didn't really carry the same weight, since the feeling of loss and hope wasn't really there. But when that guitar hits after the low, prolonged, melancholy start, it's euphoric in a sense. It's one of the single best moments I can think of, and it's entirely down to Jeff and Casey Lee Williams and the closure of Black and White. Nothing else comes close, although it has taken me a while to realise it. And just like with the letter scene of Volume 4, which, despite its message being somewhat lacking, had another such beautiful song behind it, it's moments like that that keep me coming back for more however I can get them.
You bitch!